The sun hung low over the dusty town of Redstone, painting the horizon with streaks of blood, orange, and gold. The wind carried the faint smell of scorched earth and pine, rustling through the empty streets where doors banged and shutters rattled. A lone figure appeared on the ridge, silhouetted against the dying light, moving with a quiet purpose that made the townsfolk stop and stare. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with eyes that seemed to weigh every secret in the world. His name was Cale, an Apache warrior who had walked through storms and survived battles most men wouldn't dare imagine. But today he carried no rifle, no vengeance, saw only a restless curiosity and the call of fate at the edge of town. Near the old wooden bridge that groaned under the weight of years, a wagon sat stranded in the mud. Its wheel had snapped, leaving it leaning at a perilous angle. A woman struggled to lift it, her hands raw, her face pale but resolute. She was Leora, the widow whose reputation stretched far beyond the town limits. People whispered her name with reverence, though none truly knew the depth of her influence. Leora held power not through wealth or guns, but through wisdom and an unshakable presence that commanded attention. She ran the general store, managed the town's affairs, and was quietly the backbone of Redstone's fragile peace. Cale slowed as he approached, observing her with careful eyes. He could have passed, turned to the road that led him away from every trouble he had ever known. But something about the way she balanced herself against the wagon spoke to him. There was strength there, yes, but also a loneliness, a vulnerability that invited curiosity. Without a word, he knelt beside the broken wheel and began working. Hands sure and practiced from years of survival in the harsh lands of the West, Leora watched, startled at first, then wary. She was used to strangers, men who either underestimated her or sought her favor. But Cale's silence and skill unnerved her. As the wheel snapped back into place, a faint sound of awe ran through the town. People peered from windows and doorways, whispering about the stranger helping the widow. Some recognized the hint of danger in his posture. Others noted the calm confidence that suggested he was no ordinary man. And all the while, Leora felt a strange pulse of something she hadn't known in years. An awareness that her world might just shift with the arrival of this quiet, commanding figure. Cale straightened, wiping sweat from his brow, his gaze meeting hers. There was no introduction, no exchange of names, just a nod that carried more meaning than words ever could. For a moment, time itself seemed to pause as the wind stirred the dust around them. The townsfolk held their breath, sensing the tension, feeling the weight of the unspoken. Here was a man who could change the rhythm of their lives, though none yet understood how. "Thank you," Leora finally said, her voice steady but tinged with an unfamiliar edge. "I did not expect anyone to stop." Cale's lips quirked into something resembling a smile, but his eyes remained guarded. "No one else was walking this road," he said simply. "Some things are meant to be fixed." There was more in that statement than the repair of a wagon. Leora felt it deep inside, like the rumble of distant thunder before a storm. She sensed that Cale's presence was not accidental, and perhaps neither was hers. Yet she couldn't have imagined the consequences that would follow. The ripples spreading through Redstone and beyond as they moved the wagon back onto the main trail. A shadow lingered in the alley across the street. Eyes followed their every motion, whispers traveled faster than the wind, and the town's old secrets began to stir. Leora's influence was about to meet Cale's power, and neither would remain unchanged. The first step had been taken. But what neither Cale nor Leora knew was that someone with motives buried deep in patience, sharper than a knife, had already marked this encounter. A choice had been made, a chain of events set in motion. And the town of Redstone, quiet and unsuspecting, was about to discover that even a single act of help could ignite a fire no one could control. Cale mounted his horse, and Leora stood, hands resting on the wagon, staring after him. For the first time in years, she felt the weight of uncertainty press against her. A thrilling, terrifying reminder that the world held more than routine and safety. She did not yet know his name, and he did not yet know her story. But the threads of destiny were weaving a pattern neither could ignore, as the sun disappeared behind the mountains. Painting the sky in shadow and fire, the town settled into an uneasy silence. Doors were bolted, lights flickered, and whispers filled the streets. Redstone would wake tomorrow changed, though no one yet understood how. And somewhere beyond the ridge, Cale rode forward, carrying a secret he did not yet speak, unaware that his actions had already begun to shift the balance of power in this quiet, resilient town. The night stretched, thick and expectant, leaving a single question hanging in the air. What happens when the most feared outsider meets the woman everyone respects? The one who holds the fate of a town in her hands? And what truths would come to light before the dawn? The wind picked up, rattling the wooden signs, as if whispering the answer, but only time would reveal it. Night draped itself over Redstone like a velvet cloak, and the town seemed to exhale in the quiet. Lanterns flickered behind window panes, casting long shadows across the dirt streets. Inside the general store, Leora moved with careful steps, ranging supplies as if the act itself could keep her mind from wandering. She thought about the man who had repaired her wagon, a tall Apache with eyes like polished obsidian and a presence that seemed to weigh everything it touched. His name, she realized, was unknown to her, but his impact was already undeniable. The town had never seen anyone like him, and in some unspoken way, she felt both drawn to and wary of the stranger who had appeared without warning. Outside, the wind carried distant sounds, the clip of horse hooves, the murmurs of restless animals, the faint crack of a branch breaking under some unseen weight. Redstone, though small and quiet, had its share of secrets. Leora herself had built her life around managing them, keeping disputes from boiling over, guiding lost souls, and negotiating tensions between ranchers, traders, and settlers. Her influence was subtle, but absolute, and it had not gone unnoticed. Even so, the arrival of Cale shifted the balance in ways she could not yet measure. Cale had camped near the ridge beyond the town, where the trees thickened and the air smelled of pine and earth. He moved with a careful patience, tending to his horse and inspecting the landscape. Years of survival in harsh lands had honed his senses to a razor edge. He noticed everything: the faint glimmer of light from Leora's store, the shape of distant smoke curling from chimneys, the echo of footsteps in the streets. Something about Redstone felt different, more fragile and intricate than the other towns he had passed. There was an invisible pulse here, a hidden tension that suggested old wounds, unspoken rules, and power lying just beneath the surface. He thought of the wagon, of Leora's hands pressed against the splintered wood, and the steady calm with which she accepted his help. It was not fear that had guided her, nor casual gratitude. It was recognition of strength, and perhaps an instinct that told her this stranger could shape her world in ways she could not yet understand. Cale did not seek power, but he recognized it when he saw it, and Leora held it in every measured movement, every glance, every deliberate word. Meanwhile, within the town, whispers had begun to spread. Redstone thrived on gossip as much as trade, and news of the Apache helping the widow traveled quickly. Some speculated he was a wanderer, seeking shelter or work. Others feared he might be a scout for some hidden threat, though no one could say what that threat might be. Children peered from behind barrels, daring each other to approach the stranger's campsite, while older men exchanged quiet nods, weighing the implications of his presence. Leora heard the whispers, but she said nothing, choosing instead to focus on her store, on her responsibilities, on the fragile equilibrium she had built over the years. Her thoughts drifted to her past, to the life she had carved out after her husband's death. She had been young, strong, and determined. Yet the weight of the town's expectations and the scarcity of allies had pressed heavily upon her. She had survived hardships others could not imagine, endured betrayals, and built her influence through shrewd judgment and unyielding resilience. And now, as she considered Cale, she realized that her carefully constructed life might be about to shift in ways both dangerous and profound. Cale did not sleep deeply that night. His mind was restless, caught between instinct and observation, between the past he carried and the unknown road ahead. He thought of the many towns he had passed, the people he had helped or protected, and the price he had often paid for his actions. Redstone felt different, as if it were waiting for something, waiting for an event that had yet to arrive. A confrontation or revelation that would disturb the surface calm. He could feel it in the tension of the air, the way shadows gathered at the edges of the town, and in the faint glimmer of hope or fear in Leora's eyes that he had glimpsed briefly before night fell. Morning arrived with a soft haze. The town began to stir. Leora opened the store, carefully arranging provisions as she had done for years, yet she could not shake the image of Cale's presence, the way he had moved with quiet authority, and the unspoken acknowledgement that their paths were now intertwined. She wondered if he would return, if he would bring change with him, and what consequences might follow from a single act of aid. Cale did return, though not immediately. He lingered at the edges of town, observing the patterns of life, noting who watched from windows, who moved quickly along streets, who whispered, and who avoided the open paths. There was a rhythm to Redstone that he could almost map, a network of influence and tension, and he sensed that Leora was at its center. That realization brought both caution and curiosity. Over the next few days, Cale's presence became known in quiet, subtle ways. He helped where needed, repaired a fence, guided a trapped horse back to its corral, all without claiming attention. But each act carried weight. The townsfolk could not ignore him, and slowly they began to speculate, to whisper about the stranger whose skill and calm bore the hallmarks of a life hardened by experience. Leora noticed these shifts, recognizing the pattern from her years of navigating human nature. She understood that influence could be wielded silently. She sensed Cale was beginning to understand it too. Yet beneath the ordinary routines, tension simmered. Leora felt it when she walked through the market, sensing eyes following her, noting how she interacted with the stranger who had entered her life without warning. Cale sensed it too, in the subtle movements, the hidden glances, the faint unease that lingered under the surface of casual greetings. Something was coming, though neither could yet see its shape, and both understood instinctively that when it arrived, Redstone would not remain unchanged. One evening, as the sun dipped low and painted the streets in orange fire, Leora stood outside her store watching Cale ride slowly toward the ridge. His horse moved with deliberate calm, and he seemed to carry the weight of unseen histories, of experiences he did not share. She realized that beneath his silence, he held stories of survival, of conflict, of choices that had shaped him into a force both unpredictable and compelling. She felt a strange combination of admiration and apprehension. This was a man who could challenge the very foundations of her carefully ordered world, and perhaps that challenge was inevitable in the shadows. Figures moved quietly, observing the town and its interactions. They had noticed Cale, his presence, and the subtle sway Leora commanded over her neighbors. Their motives were hidden and their patience long, but their eyes were sharp, and they would not wait indefinitely. Redstone had been a quiet place, a fragile town balanced between the past and the present, and now forces beyond comprehension were aligning. Drawn to the crossroads created by a widow and an Apache warrior who had met by chance, the night deepened, carrying with it an electric sense of anticipation. Lanterns swung in the breeze, horses stamped in the stables, the wind whispered through the trees as though carrying secrets meant for no ears but the observant. Leora stood at the edge of the wooden porch, feeling the tension thrum in her chest, sensing that her life into the town she had built was poised on the edge of a moment that would alter everything. Cale watched from the ridge, aware that his path had collided with hers in ways neither fully understood, yet recognizing the force of destiny at work in subtle, undeniable currents. And so, the town of Redstone slumbered, unaware that the threads of fate were weaving a story more complex than any had anticipated. A single act of help had set the stage. A stranger had entered their lives, and the most powerful woman in town had been touched by forces beyond her control. Tomorrow would arrive, bringing with it new challenges, new revelations, and the first real test of the uneasy balance now established somewhere in the darkness. Unseen eyes watched, waiting for the moment when silence would break, when decisions would be made, and when the town's fragile peace would confront the inevitability of change. And in that silence, the first whispers of what was to come began to stir, Morning broke over Redstone with a pale, trembling light. The streets were quiet, but the calm felt brittle, like a thin layer of ice ready to crack under the weight of a single misstep. Leora stepped outside her store, adjusting the edge of her shawl, and scanned the horizon. Cale had vanished into the ridge overnight, leaving behind only a faint trail of hoof prints and a lingering sense of inevitability. She knew he would return, though she could not say when. Her mind swirled with questions. Why had he come? What had drawn him here? And what did his sudden presence mean for the fragile stability she had fought to maintain at the edge of town? A small group of ranchers and traders gathered in hushed conversation. Their leader, Garrick, a broad-shouldered man with a scar tracing his jawline, kept glancing toward the ridge, eyes narrowed. "That Apache? He isn't ordinary," Garrick muttered, voice low. "He moves like a shadow, watches like a hawk. Mark my words, something is coming." The others nodded, uneasy, though none dared approach him directly. The town had grown used to Leora's influence, but outsiders had always been a wild card. And Cale's arrival unsettled even the most hardened men. Meanwhile, Leora's trusted aide, an intelligent and sharp-eyed man named Thane, approached her cautiously. "The wagon incident has stirred more than curiosity," he said. "People are talking, and some of the ranchers are nervous. They don't understand him, and that makes them uneasy." Leora's eyes darkened. She had anticipated scrutiny, but she had not expected fear to spread so quickly. Redstone thrived on order and predictability, and Cale's presence threatened both. "We cannot let panic take root," she replied firmly, "but we must watch him closely. There is more to him than what he shows." Cale, riding along a narrow trail outside the town, felt the weight of unseen eyes. Every movement in the forest, every rustle in the underbrush, seemed amplified. Years of living in harsh lands had taught him to trust instincts, and tonight they hummed with quiet alarm. He sensed that Redstone was more than a simple town. It was a hub of intersecting powers, old grudges, and hidden ambitions, and his arrival had disturbed the balance. Somewhere in the shadows, forces were preparing to move. He did not yet know who or what, but the tension was unmistakable. Back in Redstone, Leora met with her circle of confidants in the dimly lit back room of the general store. Candles flickered, casting long shadows on the walls lined with supplies and ledgers. There was Silas, the blacksmith whose hands had shaped the tools of every rancher in town. Marlowe, the town's innkeeper, who knew every traveler and every rumor that crossed the plains. And Alara, a healer whose presence carried calm authority. Each of them had observed Cale in different ways, and each had come to a similar conclusion. He was no ordinary wanderer. He helped Leora with the wagon. "But that was only the beginning," Silas said, pounding a fist lightly on the table. "I've watched him move. He's precise, quiet, and he sees more than he lets on. Something about him doesn't belong to this place." Marlowe nodded. "And he's already affecting the town. People notice. They whisper. They watch. Even those who pretend to ignore him are uneasy. That alone can start trouble." Alara leaned forward, voice low. "We cannot know his intentions. We must learn carefully before assumptions take us too far. The wrong move could ignite more than suspicion. It could start conflict." Leora felt the tension coil tighter in her chest. Redstone had weathered storms before floods, raids, disputes, but the current threat was unseen, unpredictable. She understood instinctively that Cale's presence was the catalyst, but she could not yet discern the nature of the coming storm. "We will observe," she said finally, voice firm. "We will not act rashly, but we will prepare. If danger comes, Redstone must not be caught unready." Cale returned to the ridge at dusk, his horse moving silently over the worn trail. The forest seemed to press close around him, holding secrets and whispers that only he could sense. He had noticed the subtle movements in town, the glances from windows, murmured conversations, the careful distance maintained by those wary of his presence. But more than observation, he felt an energy, a latent tension tied directly to Leora. She was a pivot in the balance of power, and though he did not yet understand why, he knew that their encounter had been more than coincidence. As he approached the town edge, a sudden noise froze him. A figure slipped between the shadows of two buildings, moving with deliberate care, but not quietly enough. Cale dismounted, hand instinctively resting on the knife at his belt. The figure paused, turning a pale face toward him. It was a boy, no older than 13, but with eyes sharper than most men he had met. I was told to watch, the boy stammered. They said, don't trust him. But I had to see. Cale's gaze narrowed. He could sense fear, but also a strange determination in the child. He let the boy retreat, silently acknowledging that Redstone's defenses ran deeper than appearances suggested. Inside the town, Leora paced the floor, restless. Thane had returned from a circuit through the outskirts, and his news deepened her unease. Several ranchers reported seeing strangers near the northern trail, he said. They were not travelers. They moved like predators, observing, noting. One claimed to see symbols on the tree marks we have never seen. Leora frowned. Symbols meant warnings, signs, or claims of territory. Redstone had always been a town wary of outsiders, but these marks hinted at planning, intent, and a force that sought more than simple mischief. That night, Redstone seemed to hold its breath. Even the wind was cautious, spearing through the alleys and across the stables, as if aware of the storm forming on the horizon. Leora lit candles in every window, signaling vigilance and readiness. Cale remained outside the perimeter watching, sensing, and preparing for whatever forces were moving in shadows. Neither could know the full scope, but both could feel the inevitability of confrontation. In the days that followed, tension rippled through multiple layers of the town. A trading dispute flared over ownership of a water source, stoked by those who saw opportunity in uncertainty. Silas discovered that tools had been tampered with in the smithy, subtle enough to cause accidents if used carelessly. Ilara tended to a few minor injuries that seemed suspiciously intentional, and all the while Cale moved through the edges of Redstone, observing, assisting quietly, but never revealing his full capabilities. The town's equilibrium teetered on the edge, and every action, every glance, every whispered word carried weight. The main conflict was no longer just the presence of Cale or the mystery of the strangers. It was the collision of influence, power, and survival instincts. Leora's authority, carefully nurtured over years, faced subtle challenges from within and without. Cale's intentions, unclear but undeniably potent, introduced unpredictability into a town built on order. And the unseen watchers, those who had marked trees, observed trails, and whispered threats, moved patiently, knowing that a single mistake could ignite chaos. One evening, as shadows lengthened and the air thickened with anticipation, Leora met Cale at the edge of town under the dim light of the setting sun. Neither spoke immediately. The tension was not just between them, but among the invisible web of threats, rumors, and hidden agendas surrounding them. Leora finally broke the silence. You've changed things, she said quietly. The town is restless. People whisper, fear grows. Why are you here? Cale studied her carefully. I did not come to stir trouble, he replied. I did not come here by chance. Something is coming, and you are at the center of it. Her eyes narrowed. At the center? You know nothing of the balance I maintain here. You don't know what's at stake. Cale nodded. Perhaps not fully, but I see it. And I see the forces gathering beyond the visible, the dangers lying in wait. I can help, if you will let me. Leora felt a shiver of uncertainty. His offer carried both hope and threat, a promise and a warning, and she understood that Redstone's next days would test every skill, every instinct she possessed. The town slept uneasily that night. Lanterns flickered in windows, doors were bolted tight, and even the wind seemed hesitant as it moved through alleys and past wooden buildings. Somewhere in the distance, a howl of an unseen predator echoed across the plains, a reminder that the world beyond Redstone remained untamed and dangerous. And as Leora and Cale watched from opposite ends of the town, the sense of imminent change pressed against them. Silent force that neither could yet confront fully. Unseen eyes lingered, waiting. Whispered plans moved like shadows among the trees, and small acts of observation carried the weight of strategy. Redstone had survived storms before, but this was different. This was a collision of power, purpose, and survival instincts. and the first sparks had already ignited. The town, the Apache warrior, and the most influential woman in Redstone were poised on the edge of a turning point, and neither could know how deep the consequences would reach. Every step, every glance, every decision in the coming days would ripple through their lives, altering destinies, alliances, and the fragile peace that held the town together. And somewhere beyond the ridge, hidden in shadow and intent forces, waited patiently, knowing that the real challenge had not yet begun. The wind had shifted, carrying a sharp metallic scent through the town of Redstone. It tugged at the edges of rooftops and stirred the dry grass in the fields, a subtle warning that something was about to break. Leora stood on the porch of her general store, eyes scanning the horizon, mind tense with unease. Cale had returned to the ridge earlier, riding slowly, deliberately. But even his calm presence could not quiet the sense that the town teetered on the edge of danger. At the same moment, Garrick and his group of ranchers gathered at the stables, whispering in hurried tones. "I've seen them," Garrick said, voice low and urgent. "Figures moving in the canyons north of town. They're watching, waiting. I don't know what they want, but it's no ordinary threat." The others nodded grimly. Fear, sharpened by uncertainty, had begun to spread. Redstone had always known danger, but the kind that moved unseen, patient, and calculating, was new. Leora met with Thane and Alara inside the dim back room of the store, the flicker of candles casting long shadows across the walls. "The northern trail," Thane said, spreading a rough map over the table. "The Watchers are converging. They'll strike soon if we don't act." Leora's jaw tightened. "We cannot let panic rule the town, but we must prepare. Cale's skill and experience are the edge we need. If he can coordinate with us, we might have a chance." Alara nodded, her eyes steady. "We need to understand their motives, who they are, what they intend. The unknown is more dangerous than the visible." Cale moved through the northern ridges with a predator's awareness. Every rock, every tree, every shadow was a potential threat or warning. He could sense the Watchers now, hidden among the ridges, observing the town, their intentions deliberate and methodical. His instincts, honed over years of navigating harsh lands and conflict, were screaming that time was short. He dismounted. Near a small outcropping of rocks, scanning the canyon with a careful, practiced eye. The sun was low, casting long shadows that concealed movement. He knew the coming confrontation would test everything's strength. Skill, judgment, and the fragile trust slowly forming between him and Leora. Back in town, Leora moved among her people, checking supplies, fortifying the few defenses they had, and quietly signaling readiness. The atmosphere was thick with anticipation. Traders and ranchers spoke in hushed tones. Children were kept close to home, and even the animals seemed restless. Leora felt the weight of responsibility pressing down, knowing that any misstep could endanger not only herself, but everyone who relied on her guidance. As evening approached, Cale returned briefly, his presence like a shadow passing through the streets. "They are patient," he told Leora, voice low and controlled. "They watch, but they are not reckless. They believe the town is vulnerable, and they are testing us." Leora's hands clenched. "We will not be tested. We'll be ready." There was a tension between them, an unspoken acknowledgement that this was no ordinary threat. Cale's calm authority and her influence over the town were both vital, but even together, they faced uncertainty that stretched beyond their understanding. Night descended with an eerie silence. Lanterns flickered, horses stamped nervously in their stalls. The wind carried faint, almost imperceptible movements from the northern ridge. Leora and Cale stood side by side on the edge of town, watching, waiting, aware that the next hours would define the safety of Redstone. Every instinct, every glance, every movement mattered. Even the smallest error could spark chaos. Suddenly, a flash of movement across the northern ridge caught Cale's attention. Shadows twisted among the rocks, too precise to be natural. "They're advancing," he whispered, voice sharp. "We need to draw them closer, funnel them where we can see and control." Leora nodded, understanding immediately. "We'll use the town's layout," she said, pointing to narrow streets and alleys. If they come, they'll be forced into paths we can manage. Garrick and his men took positions discreetly, preparing to defend the town with whatever means they had. Silas checked weapons at the smithy, ensuring every rifle and tool was ready. Alara moved among the families, giving instructions calmly but firmly, reinforcing barricades and safe zones. Every person in Redstone felt the growing tension, aware that the fragile peace they had maintained was about to be tested. As the first stars appeared in the sky, Kale led the initial movement along the ridge, signaling subtly to Leora and the others. The Watchers shifted in response, testing boundaries, probing for weakness. It was a delicate dance, a battle of patience and perception, each side measuring the other, waiting for a misstep. Leora's heart pounded as she observed from the street below. Her influence over her people stretched to its limits as she coordinated silently with Kale's guidance. Suddenly, a distant shout broke the tension, followed by a clatter of rocks tumbling down the northern ridge. The Watchers had made their move, testing the town's defenses. Kale responded immediately, moving with precision, intercepting the first approach with swift, controlled action. Leora signaled to the townsfolk to hold positions, her calm voice cutting through fear like a blade. The confrontation escalated, small but intense, a clash of strategy and skill that left both sides measuring each other with deadly caution, from multiple angles. The tension built. One group of Watchers attempted to flank through the outer streets, only to encounter Silas and Garrick, whose combined experience in the land gave them an edge. In another alley, a figure darted toward the general store, only to be intercepted by Thane and a small contingent, their movement precise and coordinated. Each encounter, though brief, carried immense weight. Every choice, every reaction, could tip the balance toward safety or disaster. Kale's focus never wavered. He moved like a shadow through the edges of town, intercepting threats, guiding townsfolk, and anticipating enemy movements. Leora's presence alongside him added another layer of strategy, her knowledge of Redstone's layout and her command over the townspeople, critical in keeping the confrontations contained. Together, they formed a force both visible and invisible. A combination of strength, insight, and influence that even the most patient enemies had not anticipated. The tension reached its peak as one of the Watchers slipped too close to the central plaza. Kale intercepted, moving with fluid precision. Leora directed townsfolk to secure the remaining streets, her voice calm but authoritative. The night seemed to hold its breath, the silence punctuated only by movement, shouts, and the occasional clash of metal. Redstone teetered on the edge of chaos, each second stretching, charged with anticipation of the inevitable breakthrough at the same time. Hidden threats stirred elsewhere in the town. Symbols carved into the fences and walls hinted at deeper plots, forces watching and waiting for the right moment to strike. Leora felt the weight of every detail, the placement of every board, the position of every weapon, the readiness of every resident. She knew that even as Kale and the immediate threats engaged, the true test of the town's resilience had yet to come. Hours passed in a tense balance, the confrontation escalating and ebbing like waves against a cliff. Kale's movements were precise, calculated, but each action carried risk. Leora's command over the town was tested continuously, each instruction critical. Even minor errors could have catastrophic consequences. The awareness of that possibility heightened every heartbeat, every glance, every whisper as the night deepened. The Watchers became more daring, testing the edges of Redstone's defenses, probing for weakness, drawing attention with feints and subtle movements. The town, guided by Leora and Kale, responded with precision, holding its ground despite the growing pressure. The streets were alive with quiet intensity, each movement deliberate, each decision charged with stakes higher than any had faced before. Leora paused at the top of the steps of her store, watching the subtle dance of conflict unfold below. She felt both fear and exhilaration, knowing that the culmination of all their preparation was at hand. Kale's presence, steady and unwavering, gave her strength, but she could not shake the awareness that the real test was yet to come. Somewhere in the shadows, beyond immediate sight, the forces they faced were organizing, preparing for the moment that could shatter the fragile balance of the town. The air seemed to hum with anticipation. Horses whinnied nervously in the stables. The wind carried a tense vibration, and even the distant mountains seemed to loom closer, heavy with promise and threat. Leora tightened her grip on the railing, eyes fixed on Cale's silhouette as he moved along the perimeter. Both knew that the climax of this confrontation was approaching. Every observer, every conspirator, every resident of Redstone would soon face the culmination of choices, instincts, and hidden motives that had been building for days. And in that still, electric night, as the town braced for what was to come, a single truth became clear to Leora and Cale. The moment of maximum danger was near, and the safety of Redstone rested on their ability to remain calm, precise, and unwavering. The threads of tension stretched taut, ready to snap in either direction, and the town, caught between patience and fear, waited for the storm that was about to strike. The first light of dawn broke over Redstone, soft and golden, brushing the town with warmth that chased away the night's tension. The streets, once heavy with the anticipation of conflict, were quiet now, almost peaceful. Leora stood outside her store, shoulders relaxed but alert, breathing in the crisp morning air. The immediate threat that had shadowed the town had passed, though the memory of the previous night's danger lingered like a warning etched into every corner of the streets. Cale rode slowly through the town on his horse, careful to make his presence visible, but calm. The townsfolk watched him, some with awe, some with gratitude, and a few with lingering suspicion. He had been a storm and a shield, moving through shadows and uncertainty to keep Redstone intact, and his skill, intuition, and quiet authority had saved them all from disaster. Leora met his gaze as he passed, and for a moment, the weight of everything that had happened hung between them. No words were necessary. Mutual respect and understanding passed silently, stronger than any spoken declaration. The Watchers, the hidden forces that had moved along the northern ridge, had retreated, deterred not just by Cale's precision and strength, but by the unity Leora had orchestrated among her people. Those who had sought to destabilize Redstone realized that the town was no longer as fragile as it had seemed. Every alley, every narrow street, every careful measure that Leora had implemented now proved invaluable. The combination of her influence and Cale's skill had turned a night of looming chaos into a triumph of strategy and courage. Inside the general store, the town's leaders gathered to assess the aftermath. Garrick and Silas spoke in low voices about the movements they had observed and the lessons learned from the night's events. Marlowe the innkeeper noted the stories that would now spread about Redstone's resilience, while Alara tended to the few minor injuries sustained during the skirmishes. Leora listened to them all, feeling a quiet pride in the people who had followed her guidance and acted with courage. She knew that the town had survived not just because of Cale or herself, but because everyone had played their part, responding to tension with calm determination rather than panic. Thane approached Leora with a subtle smile, holding a small bundle of documents and reports. "There's much to clean up," he said, handing her the papers. "But the town's integrity remains intact. Its people will rebuild, repair, and remember this as a night of unity, not fear." Leora nodded, absorbing the weight of his words. She understood that leadership was not about avoiding danger, but about navigating it with intelligence, strength, and compassion. Redstone had passed its first real test, and its foundation was now stronger than ever. Cale dismounted near the edge of the plaza, dust settling around his boots. Children, who had watched from behind fences and windows, began to emerge, curiosity and admiration shining in their eyes. One small boy approached cautiously, staring up at the Apache warrior. Cale's eyes softened, and he knelt to meet the child's gaze. "Courage is not about fighting alone," he said, voice low but clear. "It's about standing together, protecting those who cannot protect themselves, and knowing when to act with patience." The boy nodded, understanding far beyond his years, and ran back to the safety of his family. Leora joined Cale, standing beside him as they watched the town slowly come to life. Merchants opened doors, horses were led from stables, and the air filled with the familiar rhythm of everyday life. Yet beneath the surface, there was a renewed sense of possibility. a quiet awareness that Redstone was stronger than anyone had imagined. The widow, who had once managed the town from a position of careful observation, now held the undeniable recognition of her people's loyalty. And the stranger who had arrived as a mystery had become an ally whose presence would be remembered for years. The town's recovery was both practical and symbolic. Broken fences were repaired, doors were reinforced, and streets were swept clean of debris. Yet the more important repairs were invisible. The fear that had begun to grow in hearts was replaced by courage, unity, and mutual respect. Leora walked through the streets greeting townsfolk, offering words of reassurance, quietly observing the subtle shift in mood. She knew that the events of the night had changed more than just the town's physical landscape. They had shifted its spirit, creating a community bound not by fear, but by shared resolve. Kale, meanwhile, took a quiet walk along the ridge, observing the town from above. The golden light of morning highlighted the buildings, the trails and the fields beyond, and for the first time in days, he allowed himself a moment of reflection. The conflict had tested him as much as it had tested Redstone, pushing his skills, patience, and instincts to their limits. Yet in that trial, he had found something unexpected: connection. Not just to Leora, but to a town that, for all its simplicity and ruggedness, held complexity, resilience, and untapped strength. The tension that had dominated the previous nights was now replaced by cautious optimism. Leora joined him on the ridge, standing shoulder to shoulder with the Apache warrior. "Redstone survived," she said quietly, her voice carrying both relief and strength. "But this town has changed, and so have we." Kale nodded. "Change is never easy, but it is necessary. You've built something here worth defending. Leora worth standing with." Their eyes met, and in that moment, unspoken understanding bridged the space between past and future, danger and hope. As the day unfolded, Redstone returned to its routines. Yet the events of the past night were never far from mind. The people spoke quietly of the stranger who had arrived unexpectedly, who had risked himself to protect them all, and of the widow whose leadership had been decisive in their survival. Children played with a newfound courage, parents smiled with quiet pride, and even the land itself seemed to breathe a little easier, bathed in sunlight that no longer carried the weight of threat. In the late afternoon, Kale prepared to leave the town for a while, though neither he nor Leora expected it to be permanent. "I will return," he said, voice steady. "Redstone is part of my path now, whether I follow it immediately or not. I do not know what lies ahead, but I know that you and this town have earned my protection. As you have earned my respect." Leora nodded, feeling both gratitude and a quiet sense of companionship that had grown from shared challenge and mutual trust. The townsfolk gathered one last time, standing along the main street as Kale mounted his horse. Children waved, merchants nodded, and even Garrick and Silas offered uncharacteristic smiles. Leora raised her hand in farewell, her gaze steady on the figure who had arrived as a mystery and departed as a protector. The morning had begun with tension and fear, yet it ended with recognition, hope, and the quiet triumph of resilience. Redstone, though still small and rugged, had proven that unity, courage, and intelligence could withstand the weight of unexpected danger. Leora returned to her store, walking through the familiar aisles, feeling the reassurance of order restored and the satisfaction of leadership that had been tested and proven. The town would heal, strengthen, and continue to thrive, each day shaped by lessons learned, bonds formed, and the memory of the night when fear had brushed against them and been held at bay. Kale rode slowly out of Redstone, the ridge behind him bathed in gold. His mind reflected on the events, the people, and the unexpected connections he had formed. He had entered the town as an outsider, a stranger, but he left as part of its story, bound by trust, respect, and shared experience. The horizon stretched wide and promising, and though he carried the awareness of unknown dangers elsewhere, there was a quiet satisfaction in knowing that Redstone, under Leora's guidance, was ready for whatever might come next. As the sun dipped toward evening, the town settled into a calm rhythm once more. Lanterns glowed in windows, horses were tended, and families shared meals. The sense of danger had lifted, replaced by cautious optimism and a renewed sense of purpose. Redstone had survived, not by chance, but by the courage, wisdom, and cooperation of its people, and by the presence of a stranger whose skill and integrity had made all the difference. And so, in the quiet warmth of the early evening, Leora stood on her porch one final time. Looking over the town that she had guided through peril, she understood that leadership was never about avoiding conflict, but about meeting it with courage and intelligence, inspiring others to do the same. Kale's shadow lingered in memory, a reminder that even in the most ordinary of towns, extraordinary forces could arrive unexpectedly, in that strength, honor, and unity could turn danger into triumph. Redstone thrived, secure in the knowledge that its people could endure, adapt, and protect one another. The widow who had once struggled with a broken wagon now stood at the center of a community stronger than ever. And somewhere beyond the ridge, Kale rode toward new horizons, carrying with him the certainty that bonds formed through shared challenge endure far longer than any fear ever could. The town exhaled, the tension released, and in the glow of sunset, Redstone looked to the future with hope, courage, and the knowledge that even the unexpected could become a force for good. And in that quiet certainty, the story of the Apache and the widow reached its natural close, leaving the town and its people ready for whatever new adventures awaited.